Before we get into the episode today, guys, big thank you to Hardware Pioneers Max for sponsoring today's episode. Hardware Pioneers Max 2022 event is taking place in London very, very soon. Make sure you get yourself down there. It's a truly amazing event with lots of great people. Thank you very much for coming on. As we were saying backstage, really excited to learn more about what Deloitte are doing in the IoT space. So excited to get into it today. Just to kick things off then, can you give me a brief background about who you are and why you joined Deloitte?
Oh, two big questions. Who am I? Professionally? So I'm a consultant by profession. That means I never had a real job. I have been in consulting for the last 22 years, always on the border between business and technology. So I have a passion of technology when it works, when it makes sense, when it's well organized, when it's delivering value. So that's really why I went into the profession. But I never really did that in a business context, so to say. I've worked in factories in various roles, but always as a consultant. So I'm a consultant by nature, and that's also the reason why I joined Deloitte. Previously, when I looked at Deloitte, I thought these guys, they only make slides. And I was a bit wary of joining a company like so big. But what I felt is that when we are on projects in a very multidisciplinary manner. That means that we can bring lawyers to the table, accountants, technologists, consultants, strategists, and all in one mix in one project, which really makes a difference when you are working on innovative projects. Sometimes the law needs to change. I did once a project where there was no real definition in the law about real time. What does that mean? And what is it to use data in an operational context? And so you immediately come to, we need to change certain things to make it available. And that's one of the reasons why I joined Deloitte to work on these bigger projects, but also why I stayed, because the impact that we can have.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I completely resonate with that. And I think, most people know Deloitte for consulting, strategy, enterprise technology and programs. So it's interesting to see the involvement in IoT. How big is the IoT practice within Deloitte?
Well, if you look at it from a global scale, we're about 1,200 consultants of various types. So some of our people, they work more on the real technological parts of IoT, meaning edge to cloud and all of the different components that come in between. We have a team that work on hardware. We have teams that work on properly the business cases around IoT. So what value will it bring? Will a connected product portfolio help to conquer new markets? That's a whole different discipline than the technology discipline that we have. But in total, about 1,200 people in various disciplines. So we really aim to be end-to-end. And end-to-end means we design the solution, we implement the solution, but we also run the solution for our clients. And that last part, that's where really the rubber hits the road and where you have to know what you're doing. Because changing something from I just sell a product to 24/7 service operations, that's tremendous impact for an organization. I've once done a very interesting project around tire as a service. It's a completely new business model. It's all about measuring wear of tires in specific contexts. Your typical sales force does not know how to sell such a model. They know how to sell 1,000 tires to a transport company, but they don't know how to sell a subscription. So that's really a new discipline that we see emerging in the market. And I really like that element of it. I can today buy convenience, 21 degrees in my house, which means I buy heating and airco at the same time. I'm not aware that I'm buying two devices, but I'm just buying the 21 degrees in the house. So I think that there is a major shift in an easier integration into our daily lives with IoT.
Yeah, that's a great use case around the tires, right? I mean, and I think it's just one of an almost limitless amount of things that you can do when it comes to sensors and harvesting of data and the use of that data, which is why I think for people, IoT has barely kind of scratched the surface of the amount of industries it can be involved with, and the amount of different places that we can go with this. You mentioned, of course, the size of Deloitte as a business is, globally, probably 400,000, 500,000 people, 1,200 in IoT. So I guess that gives you a really good grounding to be able to go end to end, doesn't it? To actually do some of these projects and manage them for customers.
Yeah. Well, I still see two types of clients in the market. The ones which are experimenting. They don't have any clue yet on how it will change the nature of their business. So there we really have to go into the strategy, defining use cases, setting them on a roadmap, finding even the capabilities to deliver upon these use cases. So really the transformation of the organization as such. But at the other hand, we see even second generation IT clients that have implemented their first IT platform like 7, 8 years ago, that are now in the refresh of technology, that are now in the refresh of that business model. They've seen
Yeah.
what works and what doesn't work. They feel that they can create new types of value, but that clients are not ready to pay for that. So you have really the two types of markets that you have to be able to serve. So within the 1,200 people, yes, there are people that are more the innovators, working on the R&D parts of IoT, I would say, and we really have great thinkers in that space. But when in what I was mentioning before with running IoT services, so in the background running a smart factory solution, for instance, where we have multiple use cases on real-time asset monitoring or quality sensing. Well, that's a whole different type of skills. You have to really understand plant operation, shop floor operation, what an operator needs, how you can help him from a remote location. That is a different skill set that you need. So we really need to be multidisciplinary to be able to serve a larger client that is really in the second generation as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can completely understand. But given the amount of people that you've got within this, there's obviously certain people's focus in certain areas, as you've mentioned, and you're able to deliver that. And it's interesting that you follow through to the running of the IoT platforms and the service element as well, because that's quite a big part, I would imagine. Just delivering something to a customer and handing it to them is one thing, but it's the aftercare, which is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's a whole different ball game, but not a lot of companies are good at that. Huh? Again,
Mm,
you need to have a 24/7 organization, so whole new service operating model to be able to run these connected products. You also there is a new segmentation of clients that has to be done. Now, when it's on shop floor, you know the operations, you know they work in different shifts, you know how to serve that. But when it's more a connected product, you're not gonna serve every light in everybody's house. Huh? If there is a problem, probably there is a self service that needs to be provided. So you cannot run these services as such as an organization as Deloitte. The organizations do that for themselves with their traditional distributors and technicians. So it's all about finding the right use case, finding the right operating model to serve them, but also finding what is the client ready to pay for such services. Huh? I was talking about convenience. Convenience, it's more expensive, huh? Because there is
mm,
somebody monitoring that the temperature in my house is properly 21 degrees, that my machines are well configured, but I'm paying somebody to deliver that overall service. Not all clients are ready to do that yet. And again, if tomorrow somebody comes knocking at your door and asking, can I replace some parts out of your refrigerator because I think it will break down in 2 days or in 2 weeks? I'm not sure that you will be happy for that. And all of a sudden you're imposed to cost, and you're not even sure it will break down. So we're not living in such a world yet. So if you would say the Internet of Things, of connected things with all of the services accompanied, that doesn't really exist yet. We are only starting. I often talk in Deloitte about the different futures of. If you talk about the future of energy, balancing the grid, yeah, we've already done proof of concept of grid balancing with alternative energy generators, and then in split seconds, and 2 seconds, 4 seconds framework response times, balancing the energy over an entire net. Yes, we have developed the architecture. Yes, it's running. We know that it's there. But the business model that is necessary to have your neighbor generating energy for you that you can consume, that doesn't exist yet, because you have regulated markets. There is so much constraint with continuation of the service, and so we're not ready to embrace the full potential of that. So it's only starting. Huh?
Mm.
So I'm really happy to be in this space. I'm always happy when I can come in front of my exco and talk about the opportunity that IoT actually presents, because it's a world of opportunity. If you look at the future of food, it's going to be IoT driven. From farm to fork, there is the traceability they have to provide. There is the the processing of different food products, etc., all of the way to when it is consumed. Well, that's IoT. When you talk about the future of manufacturing, it's all real-time information that can tell you something about how a furnace is being used, and therefore optimizing cost in your energy. So
Mm.
yes, but it just it hasn't even emerged yet. Huh? So
Mm.
we have all a very bright future in IT in front of us. Um, Sometimes conflicting, because there are so many world congresses on Internet of Things about the potential. But I
Mm.
remember a couple of years ago, in one of the speeches, there was asked, so who made money out of the Internet of Things, and only a couple of people raised their hands. And the question was immediately, you're probably all consultants, right? You have consulted your clients about what is possible, but to really grasp the value, to really have business case, and to go to scale, I only know a couple of companies that are successful in that.
Mm. That, that's a really poignant point that you've just made there. The theory and the strategy behind it is widespread, but the actual implementation doesn't catch up with that yet. And I think for me, and I'd like to know your views on this. I think for me, it's almost as if it's slightly ahead of its time from a cultural aspect. You talk about the fridge, so if the fridge has the potential to break down, would someone necessarily want to fix something that wasn't broken down yet? And I think that's because it's a cultural shift, in the sense that people aren't aware yet that we can harvest data to understand that there's going to be a functional problem. But also, some of the plagues behind IoT is standardization as well, and just a sheer amount of demystification that's required, right? So a lot of people talk about it in lots of different contexts, and there's lots of different names for different things. And in your view, do you think that's one of the reasons why we're still at the early stages, and perhaps that, people haven't made as much money or been as that successful in implementing solutions yet?
Now, I'm going to talk about a very concrete example that I've been able to deliver a couple of years ago. We worked for a large chemical client on a hypercompressor, a hypercompressor that pumps ethylene up to 3,000 bar. Very large machine. So we were able to leverage all existing sensors on that machine, about 1,100 sensors. We found the very critical ones that can predict failure. And so we were able to build a model that could predict failure 2 weeks in advance, which is a very, very good result for that type of machine. Okay, good. Now I can predict it. I have a model that works. I have a model that needs to be maintained. Expensive, but every time an incident happens, I can save about 250K. So it's not petty cash. Huh? So
Mm.
it's a real business case. But to make that come alive, I need changes in my manufacturing standards. I need process changes. I need to train people. And that part alone took us 2 years. So proof of concepts, 3 months to deliver a model that works and predicts, and then 2 years to get it integrated into the normal business. So that's why, right, it's sometimes so difficult to prove the value, because I have to change an entire organization that has a different mindset. You were thinking about the culture. Now I can predict something, but do I always believe the algorithm? Do I always there are so many changes happening on these machines, so I need to retrain. I need to. So there is a lot of work to be done to have a sustainable operations. At the other hand, I had another case also for a manufacturer. I was able to predict process parameters that could fix a specific bend in a board. So a boarding, a flooring company that is building boards. We predict really how much it would bend. We can correct it by changing pressure times, etc. So very interesting use case. And there we thought it would take a very long time, because it's a very complex process. No, it didn't. It took us 3 weeks to convince the operator that this model can do the work as good as they could. So it really depends on the case. I'm very aware that we probably charged this client way too little money for that model that we've built. And on the other hand, we probably charged too much for the actual result which we could achieve. So the business cases will always be somewhat complex in this early stage because there is so much that needs to change within the organization when it comes down to processes, talents, the capabilities that need to be put in place for sustainable actions.
Mm.
Um, so yes, we are at early stage, but nevertheless, I see still a lot of potential in surgery, having connected devices there as well, and that can learn us better on how to operate specific machines. That's certainly the case for projectors, for instance, that we now know how long they will run, and we can change the light bulbs a lot easier because it's an easy case. So there are cases where it's very successful, but they're more isolated, and there are cases where it's a lot more difficult because you have to change so much of the existing organization.
Mm. Mm. There's some good points that you've made there, and some good examples. What struck me about that is that a lot of it is a cost saving measure as
Yeah,
opposed to it generating money. So
yeah,
that's an interesting point there, isn't it?
yeah. If I look at the projects today, and I talk now on a global scale, we always look at projects that are there to optimize efficiency or workforce management, etc. And we are projects with new business models. Yeah? 85% is on optimize. Only 15% is on new product development. And at least they go unnoticed because we are building in a lot more connectivity in these products, but we're not selling it as such yet. The whole fact of the tire manufacturer going for a tire as a service meant as well that we had to measure tread depth of a tire, and that we had to install certain computer vision based devices in all transporters. But yeah, what I'm saying is that yes, it's possible with a couple of new sensors, and we can stabilize the activities to go to a global scale. It seems to be a bit more effort, and it's heavily underestimated on what the changes are in the entire supply chain.
Guys, we're excited to partner with Hardware Pioneers for their annual show in London. If you don't know, Hardware Pioneers are a community of over 15,000 innovators building IoT products. HP are on a mission to accelerate learning and facilitate business connections among the people who are building a smarter world. Join the conference on Tuesday the 25th of October in London. You've got guest speakers from the likes of NXP, Edge Impulse, uBlocks. And actually, you can get 50% off your ticket code using IPMAX50. Links to sign up are in the description and in the comments, and I'm excited to see you there in person. That leads me on quite nicely to my next question, is to understand a bit more about the specific industries in which Deloitte is focusing on. I know there's 4, isn't there? Is that right, Tim?
Well, what we do mostly, and it's not really related to industries, I would say, but if you look at the use cases which are most distributed across the globe, is everything that has to do with connected manufacturing logistics. And so there you will see around 60% of all of the cases that we have done sits in that space. I would say connected infrastructures, and for me, that is a pretty broad space. Connected infrastructure is grids, smart grids, airports, ports, everything that has heavy assets involved. And I work on 2 hobby projects, as I call them, because they don't generate as much revenue as we would like them, because it's still novel topics with connected foods, and that goes pretty broad, and connected health. And these are very interlinked. But for me, these are topics where we as Deloitte should work upon. In which industries we do this? For us, we have a qualification. There is a lot going on in the automotive sector, on the connected cars, the vehicle to infrastructure, all of these type of use cases. We are not that involved in these kind of cases. We are more than in the development of the ecosystems, the data spaces that are required to make this ecosystem come to life. So we work mostly in energy and resources and industrial products. So the heavy industries, oil and gas, chemicals, industrial products. And we work mostly, the second industry is consumer business and retail. So everything that has to do with logistics, improving store operations, that's where we are quite active as well. Then, as last, you also would have public sector related use cases. We are in the smart city type of cases. Honestly, it's all about mobility these days. Improving mobility, improving an understanding on how a city is being used, but the real smart city with everything connected from the lighting to all households, it's only emerging today. For one of the energy providers today, one of the TSOs, we are looking at how you can connect behind the meter. All of the devices which sit behind the meter, how can we access the data they are creating to have a better view on energy consumption and therefore a better pricing on the energy market? That is a very novel use case, and a very complex one because you work with heterogeneous devices. But that's kind of where we are most active. But for me, what my personal passion is everything around food and health, and moreover around sustainability in general. I think IoT can have a lot of value in the sustainability cases, whether it's on providing actual data on sustainability reporting, to provide to do energy optimization, to have a less food waste, for instance. Yeah, IT really has a tremendous role it can play there, with developing new sensors, but just also connecting all of the information sources which are currently already available. And so for me, that's really a passion. We, but what we tend to forget in sustainability is that there are always three dimensions, very very important. You have, of course, the real sustainability aspect of things. Is it ensuring a better world to live in? But it has to be combined with economics. Because a sustainability solution which is not economically viable will not survive. So we seem to forget that at some point people should still find a business model that really can work for them. And there is also the societal impact that something will create, societal sustainability. How can we really include a larger part of the population into the digital solutions that we are offering? Because you cannot have a fully autonomous connected device that nobody, an elderly, can no longer use. That would not be very inclusive. So for me, if it is on the verge of those three axes, I think IoT can really play a role.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting what you said there, and I think so you've got two things. You've got your personal interest and the hobbyist side, and then you've got obviously what makes sense at the moment and what is most crucial, and
Yeah.
that coincides quite nicely with other people that we've had on the show. So when it comes to smart manufacturing, IoT initiatives in that area, that's probably what you're called on a lot. But the sustainability aspect is something that's dear to me and something that is within our values as an
Yeah.
organization. And I really like that. So I actually want to touch on that slightly. So you mentioned around connected food. Could you explain a bit more what that means? Because I'm curious to know what that is.
Well, you can look at it from a couple of angles. Connected food manufacturing, for instance.
Yeah.
So, can I optimize the entire food supply chain and more specifically the food manufacturing piece of it? Yes, absolutely. I have an example where we worked very recently with Savola Foods. That's an edible oil producer in the Middle East. A very interesting company. They're market leader in their space. They own about 70% of the market. Well, actually, by going into their refineries and looking at their silos on how these tanks were mixed, for one. And so, can we assess what mixture is really in the larger silos, and then combine it with refinery data and inline measurements of oil quality? Well, just combining these two data sources reduces at minimum 3% oil loss, 3% oil of everything which is produced. If you then know that in the entire food ecosystem, almost 45% of food produced is waste. 45% of everything we produce is waste.
It's
And
crazy, that number, isn't it?
that's phenomenal. If you can then just save 3% in the production and then save a bit in the packaging, that's what we need to do. There is so much waste going on in the entire process, and we really are helping clients like that to optimize really the entire chain. And it allows you to avoid even chemical parts of that process, because now you have a natural filtering that you could do, because if you have a much finer way of measuring the inline quality of that production process. For me, that's one element of it. The second is when you are transporting, talk about the perishables, they produce a certain ethylene, and so some products produce ethylene. So if you can measure it, you can also estimate whether it's still eatable or not. For some, it's ethylene, for others, it's acids, but you know whether it's still okay to consume a product, and you can reduce a bit the safety which is already on on the label of that product. So again, it would reduce a bit more of the waste. Now, if you can do it even better, there are ethylene absorbers that you can put into packaging. And then that makes that, for instance, strawberries, instead of being valid for a week, they're valid for a month, because you have absorbed actually what makes the product go bad. So I think there is, in food production, the production itself, the transport, and the way that when we are consuming, so much things that we can do to come to a more sustainable supply chain. And so for me, that's absolutely crucial that we continue to work on what is needed. So then we are talking about from farm to fork, that we can really optimize the entire process. But the next step is from fork, what we actually need to consume, to farm again. So we can adapt what is being produced in the right quantities, with the right herbicides, with the right pesticides, because we know what it will do to a certain population of people. And so the inverse movement also still has to be taken. So we're still in the early stages of optimizing through IoT the whole process. What about reversing it and actually pinpointing in the different elements of the cycle on what needs to happen? So I'm really excited about everything that we are doing currently in the Middle East, but also in the other companies that are producing food or controlling food. Because today we're still driving to a milkery to put in a label whether the milk is being properly extracted from the cows, but you can also measure that from a remote location, right? So you can already avoid going to a specific production site because you do that remotely. So many opportunities there in that space. I think we will see a lot of progress over the next years.
Yeah, yeah. We've had a couple of people on the show with smart cattle ranches where they monitor where cows are going, where the herds are. We've had people on, in fact, Sensorless, Belgian business, talking about freight monitoring. And that stat that you mentioned about 45%, I've heard that before. It's just absolutely crazy that we would lose nearly half of the food that we transport as perishable waste. It's just incredible that that we can allow that to happen as a race, right? We need to fix that. But I think the other thing that you mentioned here is farm to fork. So something I'm interested in, and something that we've spoken about in the podcast, is also vertical farming, right? Yeah. So it just shows the wealth of which everything within IoT can connect to other IoT initiatives. So when we talk about connected food, cutting down that transportation time by having a vertical farm, sometimes located right next to where it needs to be, has enormous benefits as well. So I can understand why you're passionate around that from an environmental and societal point of view, right? I think we are really at the early stages, aren't we?
Well, we're learning every day how to better grow certain crops. You talk about vertical farms, then you're very close to the crops that you're trying to harvest, optimizing the lighting, optimizing the nutrition that you're giving on a much more limited space, and then avoiding that there needs to be a transport of 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers to the location where you need to go. That's already a very, very interesting, evolution. But we haven't started yet. We've worked in the past on agronomy advisors. We were measuring the soil composition, and then based on the soil composition and what was harvested in the seasons before, we could say, well, to allow you to harvest X amount of grain now on that plot, you will need X amount of kilos of natrium, and etc. etc. And so all of a sudden it becomes a lot more scientifically driven. We can avoid over fertilizing, over pesticiding in one go. Now, there is a down to that as well. Um, at one hand, you have regulation defining per country, per region, on how much fertilization, how much pesticides you can you can use. At the other hand, it doesn't really say anything, because the farmer that is then keeping a piece of the land to grow crops for himself, on that piece of land, he's only using half of the pesticides. huh? So when it's for himself, he doesn't care about the limits. He will not do the maximum. He will do the absolute minimum. So there still seems to be a discrepancy between what is regulated to do, what he's allowed to do by regulation, and what he's doing for himself. So wouldn't we have to ask him a bit better on what the real requirements would be for a specific region to have the optimal crop? I still see that there is a lot for us to learn about how we can adapt policy to really get to safer products. But
Mm.
but again, that is a very complex matter. There are regulators that know what they're doing, but it's very hard when there is so much difference between the individual countries and the individual. So if you are somebody that owns a lot of land in different regions, it is not even the same. So agronomy advice is really per plot and per farmer, even on what needs to happen. So I think
Yeah.
yes, there is great evolution possible, but to change that world, there is still a lot to be done, and in the mindset of the farmer, and in the mindset of regulation, and in the mindset of the consumer.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and I think these are some of the things that are perhaps stunting the growth, right? Regulatory standardization, as I mentioned earlier, and it's a shame because everything that we've spoken about today has a real impact on people and the environment, and it's very few IoT cases out there that doesn't enrich or help people's lives. And I think as an industry, I don't know what your views are on this, but I feel as though we need a marketing overhaul of what IoT is so that it gets into the mainstream, so that people can really understand the benefits. Because I
Yeah.
think at the moment, outside of this podcast and outside of the people that we associate with, it's still seen as this esoteric, small technology spectrum around connecting devices, but it's so much more than that. And I think if people understood it and we could simplify it, maybe we could beat some of these regulatory issues and advance them forward.
Yeah, but then you need heroes. You
Mm.
need political heroes that really um, go along with the thought way that you just proclaiming there. I'm gonna give an
Mm.
example, and it's a Belgian example. We have something called iNoses. So we can measure pollution in different areas of Belgium. Very interesting, because we know actually the areas where people would better not live, because it's too polluted, there is too much emissions, etc. Now we know that at a long term, people might have a higher tendency to get sick in these areas, right? So we know that, but still we're not relocating these peoples to a safer, more healthier
Mm.
environment, because that costs a lot of money. So the money is still in the curative healthcare and corrective healthcare rather than in the preventive healthcare. Because if you would really do uh, trust the data that we have and make policy decisions and move people. And it comes with a lot of pain. I realize that, because pulling out somebody from their hometown, or their street, where there is a social tissue, where there is an entire ecosystem for them personally, it's a very hard thing to do. But if it saves lives in 10 years' time, shouldn't we just do it? And I see then
Mm.
examples in Helsinki, for instance, that is already being done. So I'm just wondering, living here in Belgium, why are we spending much more attention on preventing things from happening, and shifting the budget from for these type of causes? You need heroes. Again,
Mm.
when will you give your data away to a health institution? You're not giving that data when you're healthy. You're giving that data when you're sick, right?
Mm.
Then there is an urgency for you, and then
Mm.
you, you give it already away to Google. Google can have everything
Mm.
of your life, but when it comes down to using it for finding different pathologies, root cause of certain diseases, yeah, we're not actually contributing as a society to that.
Yeah.
And then I hear some of our politicians saying we should have more data heroism, or maybe even an obligation to give parts of our data away for the greater good. Data that can, in an anonymized way, help in clinical trials, in genome assessments, etc. So it is possible to do that, but we're sometimes scared of demanding such data from the citizens, because let's be honest, it's political suicide when you say, I now need of the Belgian population, of the 10 million people that live in Belgium, I would need this set of your data because I can save other people. I will not do that. But I think in the end, we will need a lot more data heroes that can help us to solve some of the bigger issues in the world. The example I'm giving about the cities, if there are already cities doing it and creating healthier cities, why isn't Belgium just following that example? Why is it so difficult to do the right thing? It seems to be a lot more difficult than we would have imagined. So IoT can really have a tremendous societal impact, because the data, real world evidence, which we sometimes lack in the trials that we do, is not always being accepted, because there is protectionism, because there is a system that doesn't work that way yet. But I hope that in the future, when we talk about the future of health, where well-being or health becomes a subscription, that we have these data companies that we trust to get that data for us to give as part of our personal data away, just to help other people, and that will help us tremendously as an economy and a society.
Mm. Mm.
That's
I,
philosophy, right? So
It is quite philosophical. You know what? When you were saying that, I kept thinking in my head. You only pray when you're in trouble or someone you know is in trouble,
yeah,
and you only give your data away when you need to give your data away. And I guess the problems that we've got sometimes from a philosophical point of view is the trust. So to touch on IoT security talks about a zero trust policy, right? So at the moment, it's like juxtaposed, right? You need the data and you need data heroes in order to do more with this stuff. And you need the political stance to do more and to enable things more. But then you have hysteria sometimes in the news, and sometimes rightly so, about the misuse of data. So it's almost like a catch-22 situation. Right. And I think a lot of this boils down again to, the demystification and really explaining in simple terms the benefits. But the iKnows solution is fantastic. I'm based in Bristol in the UK, and we had something similar here that was in a proof of concept stage around air pollution. In fact, Bath, the city of Bath, which is very close to Bristol, has been voted the most polluted city in Europe, or pre-Brexit, ever. Right, the most polluted city that there has been, right, and people will suffer from this, but until we properly do something about it, it's not going to happen, is it? Right.
yeah,
So I hear your points.
yeah. So will
I
the
hear your
city
points.
relocate these people?
Yeah. Wow. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So if you
the
know
flip side
that,
to it.
you now have the insights. What will you do with these insights, right?
Mm,
And it costs a lot
mm,
of money to relocate 50,000 people. Huh?
mm,
Let's be very clear. It costs a lot of money to do that, but maybe we should just do that. Huh?
mm,
And that means indeed destroying social tissues, etc. But then again,
mm.
it would not inflict one. It would save lives, and I think that's the greater cost. But it would also avoid costs in the future, and therefore
Yeah.
everybody gets better out of that. That
Yeah.
is a very
Yeah.
difficult discussion to have.
It is, but the first part tackling the problem is identifying it
Yeah.
and to raise it and to know that there is a problem, and in order to find a solution. So I completely understand where you're coming from, which it leads me quite nicely on to the future in your view and that of Deloitte's view. Obviously, look, things are moving at a rapid pace, and very strange times we live in. We've got the whole crypto Web3 kind of market going into turmoil, and a big winter coming, and lots of different things happening. What is the future for IoT in Deloitte's eyes?
Well, I think there are many futures. Huh? I think we can use the Internet of Things to automate a lot of the tasks that we have, because we will now have contextualized data on processes, on machines, on humans even, and then can automate some of the actions or nudge them for better behavior, etc. So I think IoT will fuel the future. It will accelerate through 5G because there will just be more data and faster available from assets which are fielded somewhere. So how I see it is, if I look at all of the future that we are serving, whether it's future of food, future of energy, future of controls, future of regulation, it will all be IoT driven. The Internet of
Mm.
Things will create the data which is required to get to better insights and to automate these insights and to automate these, ultimately the process around it. So it will lead to either an optimization of a process, cost reduction, more efficiency, and actually just a better world. That's our view. And so whatever sector that you were looking at, IoT will drive either a better customer experience or an optimized product flow or an optimized process all across the board. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to put it, and it resonates with me. I always say to people, Tim, I'm most excited about the things I don't even expect to happen in this industry.
Yeah.
That's the things that excite me most. The people that will be doing stuff that wouldn't even be on the radar, and I think that's possible, isn't it? So
Yeah.
absolutely.
But look at an example. Yesterday, I had by accident a conversation with a startup out of Japan. They've developed a mesh network of sensors which can predict earthquakes. Huh?
Okay.
So they tested it out in Japan, China, and a couple of other regions of the world. So by just putting a mesh network of 300 sensors, they can predict 5 days to 10 days up front for earthquakes. That means that you can, with an accuracy of an epicenter of 50 kilometers, which is very, very good, right? That's IoT as
Wow.
well. Huh? So to create a network
Mm.
of information sources that can predict something bad that will happen. Now I can shut down a generator. I can shut down certain production facilities that otherwise might get into trouble. I can relocate people. I can therefore save lives. Huh? So it's a very nice example of IoT, and not even expensive IoT, by the way. I've looked at the
Mm.
price, and it's not that tremendous that a region would have to pay to be able to predict such a terrible and economically damageful event. Huh? So I
Mm.
think, yes, IoT will prevent water losses. It will prevent energy from being spoiled. It will prevent food from being wasted. So there are so many use cases which will emerge that I hope that everybody can see the benefit and have the impact on its personal life. So for me, IoT
Yeah.
will solve some of the problems in the world, not all of the problems in the world, but at least give us the right amount of data and probably too much data to handle some of these world issues.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're going to give your data away to Google, you might as well give it across to some IoT businesses as well that can
Um,
do other things with it, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
there is of course we have to make sure that that our data is being used in the right way. Huh? I always talk
Mm.
about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Huh? Data can be used for good causes, the intended causes. Data can be used for a bad cause. Can you imagine if you hack a surveillance camera, you see when people are not there, instead of when people are there? But what if you use these images 10 years from now? That can give very ugly effects. So you were smoking in front of your house all the time, and now your health insurance will become a bit more expensive. Very extreme example. It
Mm.
will not happen like that, but that's good, bad, and ugly. We
Mm.
always have to be aware that we need to use data for the intended use. We have to protect it, even in data vaults when it comes down to personal sensitive data. But we have to give access to the right ecosystems that can do good with that data. Whether it's a business,
Yeah.
whether it's a health organization, whether it's a food manufacturer, it should be possible to use it for multiple causes. But then again, understanding where it's going towards, for how long it's valuable, what consent did I give, sometimes also going beyond the consent if it can save lives. So there needs to be rules around it, and I think the European institutions are working around a cloud rule book to make sure that our cloud providers that are out there are doing the right things as well, not only on data, of course, but more general. But we need rules that we get an ethical, sustainable data usage.
Mm. Mm.
And these are big
Tim,
words, huh? Ethical,
yeah,
sustainable, very big words. What is ethical in data?
yeah. Well, I get it. I love the analogy, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? I'm just worried if any insurance companies are listening, they might take that little that point you said and might start harvesting the CCTV footage. But crazier things have had in insurance companies. They've done that in the past, rightly and wrongly.
Mm-hmm.
With other things. So I get it. Tim, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Just going to finish with some quick fire round questions and get a bit of an insight into you. Favorite gizmo that you've got, favorite gadget that you've got at home?
I have so many.
Just one, Tim.
I have a very specific wearable that is measuring my glucose, and that
Okay.
is therefore helping me to understand what I'm eating. But also when I'm doing a training program, I'm using glucose to see when I should eat, what I should eat, and therefore optimizing my performance.
Okay. Well, what a fantastic fantastic gadget. I was very close to someone that was diabetic, and I think some of the devices that are coming out with that they're amazing. Driverless cars, yes or no?
Yes.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Okay. Biggest achievement in your career?
Something I'm very.
You can say joining Deloitte.
Joining Deloitte, but more specifically, I was able to help on the mutualization of a security system for the region of Brussels. And if you look at it, we now have one system that holds all of the cameras of the Brussels region under one umbrella. It were also these cameras that helped us to track the terrorists from that attacked our airport a couple of years later. So if I look at one project I'm particularly proud of, it's going to be that one, because I helped actually to make sure that we could find the terrorists that really damaged our country.
Wow. What advice would you give to your younger self, Tim?
Keep on learning and enjoy while learning. That's foremost. Yeah.
I like that. Tim, it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed today. You've got such a passion for the industry, and I think it's coming across loads from sustainability to where we can be. It's absolutely great. Where can people find out a bit more about what Deloitte are doing in IoT? I assume the website?
Yeah, absolutely. The website. We have a website, and there is a portion dedicated to Internet of Things. In its various domains, when it's around food or smart manufacturing. So you can always find a lot of information on our website. We also have different podcasts or YouTube channels like Mr. IoT, where we talk about various subjects in IoT as well. So just Google Deloitte and IoT, you'll find massive links.
Very good. Tim, thank you for coming on to the IoT podcast show.
With pleasure. Thank you.
A big thanks to today's sponsors, Hardware Pioneers. Guys, the event, Hardware Pioneers Max 2022, is taking place on the 25th of October 2022 in London. Check out the 50% discount code, sign up with the details in the description and in the comments. I'll be there, my team will be there. It's a fantastic event. Get yourselves there.